Well, good afternoon, I think. It's still, whatever time zone you guys are normally from. And thanks for coming here for the, last session of the day. So make sure you check in, get your CEUs and all of that good stuff. And today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, ready to operate, bridging the construction operations gap. So myself, I'm Charles Jackson. I'm with CMTA. Been a commission provider for over about 15 years on mission critical, commercial, you name it, I've tested, except for casino. So that's still on my bucket list. But outside of that, I've pretty much kind of seen it all. So I have with me Alex.
Yes, my name is Alex Kozinets. I'm a Chief Customer Officer at Facility Grid. Although for this presentation, I'm going to take my commissioning software hat off and I'm going to speak wearing my mechanical engineering and commissioning providers hat that I used to wear 5 years ago, for 40 years.
And I'm Derek DeJesus. I've been a building owner / operator for about the last 8 years in mission critical and production. Before that, I was a commissioning agent or authority myself for 20 years prior to that.
So you have your AIA, information that we all have the downloaded presentations. So one of the big things is before we do get started, I kind of want to shift the frame of mind. So we're always focusing on a successful project, but in the end, the project is just a destination, right? The project is just a journey. I apologize. The actual building and the building operating correctly is a destination. So that's kind of the mindset we want to focus on as we go forward and kind of, go through this presentation of different strategies and ways to, focus on making sure the building operates, more efficiently and, functions correctly. So let's go to Derek for the owner feedback.
Thanks, bud. So one of the bigger problems that I always see being on the owner side is that we never receive a completed project documents at the end of the day. I know, I see some faces like, really? That happens? Show of hands, do we have any building owners in the audience? We got a couple, right? So looking at what we get, it's hard copies, it's a mix of electronic copies, it's stored in different locations, SharePoint, OneDrive, Autodesk, BIM 360, whatever it may be. And that's a challenge for us when we transition to operations and maintenance, right? We need to be able to take the data points and actually put it into our CMMS program and actually be able to generate work tickets, track assets, so that we can do our activities and our maintenance staff knows when the filters were last changed, knows when the devices were last calibrated, and has the quality control test reports to support that effort so they can plan their next activities. So that's really what I've been noticing over the past 6 to 8 years is, as a CXA, I did my due diligence to ensure that we had that seamless transfer of knowledge to the ownership team. And I've seen a degradation in that high level of quality, even though the technology has increased and improved and everyone says they're focusing on transfer of operations. So focusing on current state, right? Closing out issues during construction prior to operations and handover has always been a problem in our industry, right? Owners and end users need to take over these facilities right away so they can start populating their manufacturing process, their MRI spaces, getting patients in to their rooms, and focusing on patient care, right? Or students, right? You're doing this over a spring break or a summer break activity. You can't be going back in under a MOP, method of procedure, to close out issues and to continuously focus on activities that should have been done during construction, right? Trusting that data integrity is also a problem. Handwritten copies of test procedures, pencil whipped copies of pre-functional checklists that no one can actually validate were actually performed during construction, lack of photo evidence when an issue is closed out. Everyone just says, done, right? We don't actually get how it was done, who did it, and when it was done. Nameplate data validation errors. O's or zeros, I's or L's or ones. How do we entrust that the information we're getting from the construction team is accurate? We pay a CXA, we pay a GC, we pay a subcontractor to go out and gather that data, and we still see numerous errors and omissions. Same would come true with the sequence of operations, right? We sometimes as owners are our worst enemy, right? We don't always follow the same SOO that we ask everybody to develop for us. As soon as we get that system operating as it should, we change the parameters. We put things in manual operation, we change logic, we update the graphics so that it doesn't look like what it was when our CXA commissioned it. So we have to properly train our facility staff as to how these technologically advanced systems operate. And then final, how do we entrust as-built documentation? Everyone wants to rely on a Revit model as the source of truth during design, during construction, and then ultimately in operations. But the data in is only as, or the data out is only as good as the data in.
So Derek,
Yeah.
quick question. So as a commission provider, we provide you systems, manuals, final reports, thousands and thousands of pages of documents. How much is actually useful?
You know, in our industry, a lot of that is, right? I take a lot of those systems manuals apart and we dive into emergency operations conditions, right? We dive into the executive summary to understand how the facility was at the time you commissioned it so that we can hold people accountable to completing their work. And a good example is this facility that we're at right now in Illinois. It's about 3.5 million square feet. And we have 58 rooftop units that are in a various state of operations. Some have been commissioned, some of them have never been turned on. None of them have BAS interface, no networking. We don't even know how they're operating. So we have to go back and retro commission or recommission equipment that we paid contractors to install, AEON to do startup on, and a commissioning agent to commission, right? So I have a hard time trusting a lot of the data until we actually physically go out and verify it ourselves. So what does the future state look like, right? We don't have a lot of owner savviness when it comes to commissioning, let's face it. A lot of times we're pulling RFPs off the internet or leaning on a fellow building provider that's done commissioning in the past to write an RFP for us. So we need to get better at understanding what it is the scopes we're asking to do, right? What is it that we are looking to get from the commissioning process? We also have to align many internal stakeholders for a budget. What does that budget look like? Is it half of 1% or is it 2% of overall construction costs? That has to align with the scope of work that we're trying to write, but it also has to include not just our CXA fee, the contractors, the engineers of record, the vendors, right? These are all things we all know. You can't go out to do your work if you don't have somebody to support you. And that's our job as an owner to align all those stakeholders together so that when we ask for these capital spending costs, they're included. It makes a lot of the problems go away as soon as people start getting paid. And then hiring a qualified CXA, right? We're all in this workshop together because we all want to breed and believe in the same standard and the same guideline, right? We all want to be level set so that when Emily goes out to do her work, she knows Oshkon's going to be doing it the same way, right? I, as an owner, want to trust that every CXA in this room is going to do it that same way to that same standard. That's why we get a CXA certification. Once I can pre-qualify, excuse me, all of our CXAs into our program, now I can start to make it a quals-based selection, which is what we all want, right? We all want to be able to be level set and not just be focused on low fee. And that's where we have to influence finance and purchasing to trust the owner when it comes to hiring the right CXA. Any questions? Can't believe I summarized all the problems that exist in the environment. All right, let's do this. Back to you, Charles.
All right. So a lot of these problems, unfortunately, as a commissioning provider, a lot of times we're just diagnosing it, and once we test, we're reporting what we found. But a lot of the opportunities to make the biggest change is influencing the pre-design and design. You know, we kind of believe that first 30%, that first 30% of designs where you can make the biggest impact and the biggest change for your building. So one of the things that's been mentioned today in quite a few sessions are the OPR. What needs to get in an OPR for the operations? Like right now, when you look at OPRs, most of them you go through their design parameters, what set points, what are this, but let's focus on more having the right people in the room to understand what are the operations. work backwards with that goal in mind, like focus on how am I going to operate my facility and what do we need to do to make sure that's incorporated into that design. So that's one of the big takebacks from the OPR that I see that is currently lacking. Is because a lot of times the facility guys aren't in the room. You have the engineers, you have the architect, you have the design team, you might have the owner, but that owner might not be the one that's actually running the day-to-day operations. So it's important to have everyone in that room to make the right decisions. Cool. So, and then from there, specifications. These are our contract documents, basically. Once we get it written in there, then you have the best opportunity to make it happen. So, like software, we're all talking about as-built models, what type of, information that we want. But if we get the models, are we making sure we're all at the right software, the right version? Like if you're looking at Revit 2023 versus, Revit 2017. Make sure that you have the capabilities so when this information is turned over, that you can use it. What KPI requirements, what is your building going for that you want, and you can have it trended, you can have it in there. As long as you write and describe exactly what you want in the specification, it gives you that opportunity that it becomes part of the contract. Everyone's level sets, everyone can price it accordingly and get it into the project. And like I said, in Division 1 specs, training. Like this is my favorite because sometimes you'll have one standard training. Do we need a hands-on training, or is it just in a classroom setting? My biggest thing is I was working at a hospital out in DC, and we were working on some of the load shedding sequences. And the biggest thing was we had to actually kind of put a visual diagram of actually what areas will be affected during a load shed, so the facility guys can know exactly where to go and who won't have power. So those are the type of things to kind of get more deep into just your simple, this is how the systems work, but get deep in what actually works for you. And you can put all of that into specifications. And like for me, one of the biggest things, it's a simple ask, but something that no one that really takes advantage, like a laminated riser diagram in your electrical room. It costs nothing if you put it in there in the beginning. Or your valve schedules. In a mechanical plant, how many times do you have to look up to figure out what way the arrow is going in an actuator? If you have it where it's designed, where you can see it from, without having to go up in a ladder, that'll save just a facility guy in an emergency, countless man hours. So those are things.
I got something for you.
Okay.
No, I think it's great. Charles is talking about specs, but the owners take some onus when it comes to the Division 1 project manual, right? The owners really need to be customizing these standards, right? Training, O&M, closeout, demonstration training. Everything in there needs to have owner feedback. So the owner needs to own those specs, either internally within their facilities management team or their capital program management team, and then give those to the CxA to review. Here's our baseline, here's our standard, customize this for the project, align it with the AOR, and let's issue that out to the contractors and vendors. Just wanted to add that.
Cool. Next one. And sustainability requirements. We all know now that we're getting to more energy efficient. We're getting more trying to get carbon neutral, trying to reduce our energy usage, by some big goals through ESG. I'm out in DC, so like the building energy performance standards, Energy Star LEED, ongoing CX. These are all different measures that if you know that you're going to have to report within a year, these are things that we can kind of push that, okay, make sure we have those metrics, make sure we have, the different requirements to get you there. Like for BEPS, for example, you want to get your EUI and your Energy Star. So have that where the information is trended accordingly, and there's a path to have that information seamlessly translated from the construction directly into the operation without you having to go rehire someone else. It's a lot of stuff that can be done and set up where you can easily maintain going forward. So those are some of the things that I kind of look at from the requirements section. So do we have, I guess, any questions at this point?
Just got one quick question, Charles. So what percentage of projects that you're involved in do you actually get involved in the pre-design process? And is there a vertical sector that has a higher likelihood that you're involved in the
So for us, it's actually a larger percentage because it's just our relationships with our clients currently. So I can't, like commercial, K1 through 12 and stuff like that. We have a great opportunity because we've had past relationship, and a lot of times owners learn, unfortunately, from failed past projects. So a lot of times, okay, this didn't work, so now we need to get you in early, and even relationship with architects, and we're in there like, hey, we need to come there, especially if they're going for lead or some of those requirements require us to get in there anyway. Now, of course, we still get ones, hey, the building's up, we need you to come commissioning, and I'm like, well, it's a lot of value you're going to get from there, but recently it's been about 80% currently, so that I'm in there from the beginning.
More, you've got a referral-based business is what you have, so they understand the value of you during the pre-design process.
Yeah.
Here, I have a question for you as a we were talking earlier about CMTA and transferring, all your documentation, serial numbers, web numbers, those sort of things over the next
Sure.
for example. As an owner, would your desire be for the CXA to basically put all that information into an actual report, or would your desire be for a CXA to oversee data to do that? And would the ongoing desire be for an ongoing vision perspective for the CXA to go through all the workflows and everything?
Yeah, great question, right? So our current process has the GC and some other stakeholders responsible for gathering that data. Our facilities management team wants to build out, they use SAP as their CMMS. They actually want to build that out themselves so they can get familiar with that activity, but our CXA has to do the audit. They have to physically take photos of the nameplate and then validate what they put into the Excel sheet is the right data point, but then give us that evidence just in case there is a typo. The maintenance guy can go back and look at that photo. But everything is linked. We keep everything in SharePoint, unfortunately. It's just the tool that we use. So, they have all their files, and our maintenance team also wants hard copies of everything, too. So it sounds like a very antiquated process, but it helps them in times of need. When they have to run across the plant and access something, they can take that role with them and not have to rely on an iPad being dead or the nighttime shift and turn it on or anything. So they lean on something that they're familiar with that works, and then they just like to be hands-on and very involved.
So let's focus on how do we create that baseline that we can take into operations. So how many people here are familiar with ASHRAE Guideline 1.7? Oh, perfect, because we have someone that's on the committee of ASHRAE. Got it.
Okay, so hopefully pretty soon you all will be familiar with the guideline, because this is the ongoing commissioning guideline 1.7 that we actually just starting to work on, and that guideline is going to set the standard for how you're supposed to or provide guidance on how you're supposed to manage your ongoing commissioning projects, whether they start right after the construction is completed, so on a newly constructed facility, or an existing facility that's been functioning for a period of time. And then the most important part of that is how do you get prepared? How do you get, what can you do ahead of the process? When does it start? So as we discussed, it starts in OPR, because your OPR needs to set the stage, needs to set that baseline for what you're going to be monitoring, what points you're going to be looking at, and so on and so forth. So if anyone is looking, by the way, to get involved in this guideline, reach out to me, and we welcome new members.
Cool. And yeah, and from there, like I said, there's different tools as well. So you have your monitoring-based commissioning, which the previous presentation here did a great job of going over that, and automated fault detection and diagnostic, or the other way around. But those tools can help, especially during the construction process, to give you a lot of that information. So you get that that day zero information that, okay, before it's built, this is where we're at, you know, assuming, of course, tab and everything is done, you're in perfect condition. Then you can transition to day one, and you'll have that baseline to compare to. So, you know, these are the type of tools and stuff that you can get and put in during that design and those requirements to help foster, you know, being able to operate the building a lot better. And like I said, in the details for operations, you know, understanding what you want. So, you know, the biggest things I love to look at, you know, when you're looking at some of the fault detection stuff, what's operating within the set point, and, you know, being able to tailor that information, looking at your, you know, KWH and your KBTUs when you're looking for, you know, energy usage, intensity targets, you know, any utility rate reduction, you know, like the microgrids, renewables. So these are all things and details that if you know you're going to need that information to operate your building, why not put it in the beginning during your OPR, during the specifications, and test for it during the commissioning process. See where you're at, see where you're currently at. Now, of course, you're not going to have load to, you know, some of the numbers, but you'll have a baseline, and then you can test, you know, after it, your day one, and just continuing a process. It's a lot easier to maintain than, you know, to start from scratch, especially while the project team is there.
Yeah, so one thing we like to do, and a lot of people like to do some mission criticals, you test with a false load, right? You have to test with a boiler on your chiller plant or load banks in your space to do that. And it helps improve that model validation in what you should be expecting, because a lot of times our facilities don't get built out right away. It takes time, months, years, before we actually see that load that we were expecting to validate that model. And over time, a lot of things can happen, as we already know, that within 6 months to a year, equipment's going to start to fail. Changes are going to happen to the SOO. So we want to have a better baseline sooner in a project, and especially as an owner, I want to see, am I validating everything I paid for right now, or do I have to wait 2 to 3 years to see that?
So how do we bridge this gap?
Well, first of all, who believes, who agrees with us that there is a gap between operations and construction? Great. Who thinks it's not a gap, but it's a chasm? It's much bigger than a chasm. Okay. So why is there a gap, right? Let's try to figure out who on the, so I'm actually, so if the owner, commissioning provider, and there's a gap, right? And so let's try to figure out like what's within that gap and how we can bridge it, and what we can transfer, and what the mechanisms are to transfer that. So starting with the owner project requirements, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about what can go into the OPR, you know, things like, you know, what product, you know, what's the format of the product of the commissioning process. You asked a question about the CMMS. So as part of the OPR, you can document the information that is required to be populated in the CMMS. Is, for example, you talk about, you know, take a piece of equipment, a pump. Is motor frame size information required for the owner to be populated into maximum or not, right? So things like this can be documented in OPR, and that information then can be passed. Now, the engineering team, right? So engineering intent. How do you make sure that the building owner understands that the O&M team understands what the intent for the systems and equipment was? The knowledge of the trade contractors, knowledge of the GC of the system that they installed and quality tested, right? They come across things that sometimes just kind of hang out there and not getting passed to the owner. So that information is lost. Now we have also the commissioning provider. So commissioning provider obviously touches every piece of equipment, looks at every sequence operation, finds things that maybe has been changed or need to be changed, adjusted during the commissioning process. That information is not being passed to the owner. And then whatever the requirements for the sustainable operation that, you know, speaking of ongoing commissioning, or, trending points, other data that's available that's not being passed to the owner. Okay? So when the owner accepts the building, their operations team needs to be able to answer two simple questions, right? Why equipment is there and what it does. It's basic questions. Let's take a look at things that are, kind of on a lower level of, what type of information can be, is available to the commissioning provider as they evolve throughout the project, and how they can pass it to the owner. So for example, some special things related to systems that may have been changed during or replaced or adjusted during the functional testing, for example. So I'll give you an example. Commissioning of a BSL-3 facility, right? Trying to set the pressurization, right? Making sure that the pressurization, the room always stays positive or neutral for a period of time. So my experience on a project that required replacing of a Phoenix valve with a different actuator, right? So it's a faster acting actuator on supply than exhaust. So if the fault occurs, it's still, the building is still maintained, or the room still maintains neutral pressure. So that information is super critical. Now, it is super critical to the owner to know that, first of all, this is the equipment that got installed, and also why it got installed, right? So when the owner is looking at the design later on and trying to figure out why the change occurred, they would never find that information, right? Things like, hidden things that, maybe location of a location of the pressure sensor, right? That is installed 2/3 down the main ductwork in the building. So how do you communicate that information to the owner? Information on the all those different types of procedures, emergency procedures, standard operating procedures, right? So you may have a H&S team that is has their own vision of how they're building, let's say it's a lab building, how their systems are going to operate in an emergency procedure. Well, you perform commissioning and you verify that, well, actually, when the, let's say, emergency power kicks in, the fan within the biological safety cabinet is not actually running. It's not connected to emergency power. So, well, you have to make sure that you communicate that with the H&S team, and you test that system to that procedure, and ensure that the owner is familiar with that, understands that, and if they accept it, that's fine. If not, then you need to communicate to the design team that that's not the right design, and change is required. So, how does it happen today? So why is this gap exist now? Well, because of this. So these pictures, actually, these are my pictures from my projects, because we, during the commissioning process, the knowledge that we have, the knowledge that the construction team has, the knowledge that the design team has, resides in boxes, spreadsheets, whiteboards, blackboards, or right there, that O&M that attached to a fan. Obviously, during the startup, they're probably going to remove, well, they have removed that O&M manual, but then where is it going to end up? Is it going to end up where the owner needs it to end up? You don't know. It may just lay in the roof and disappear, get blown away with wind, right? That whiteboard shows a very complex formula. Actually, I worked on that formula to set the building pressure set point such that it maintains positive pressure, right? The building was, somewhat complex with different hoods, and so we need to figure out, like, what's that set point needs to be, right? So we calculated that. Obviously, it was different from what the design documents showed, right? Which is fine. So that point got programmed, we got tested, and that was the right condition. The building was positively pressurized. However, if this information is not transferred to the owner, should the owner decide to add another hood, Should the owner decide to make some changes, they would have to recreate that information and, obviously waste time and so on and so forth. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that this does not happen. And if it does, this data needs to migrate to the owner, right? So from the contractor to the owner, from the construction team, commissioning team, design team, all the knowledge that is gained, should be passed to the owner. So how is it passed? Okay, in the perfect world, the OPR will should state, what is the system or a platform that the owner requires to be populated with data. So it can be CMMS system. Again, if it is a CMMS system, the owner should be able to clearly state what data is required, right? So we talked about the pump, we talked about other information that goes into CMMS system. So Derek, you mentioned you require pictures. Okay, so that needs to be clearly identified, documented in your tool that you're using for commissioning and passed. BIM, digital twin. So if the owner is planning on using digital twin, there needs to be clear statement in the OPR and then in the spec, the format of data that needs to migrate to the owner. So if the owner requires all the data from the commissioning process, quality control process to get into BIM, then it needs to be in the right format. You need to be able to event the project without spending any additional time, just pass the data to the owner. So how do you streamline this process, right? So basically, what you do is you start by making sure that the owner, when utilizing the data, it becomes a one source of truth, right? So that's how they're benefiting from it, because that data is coming from different sources, and when it's standardized, the owner has the only source, the correct source of that information. The digital sign-offs, audit trail, so that the owner understands who's done what on the project, who's done what on a piece of equipment, so they have all the records, and they can always come back and verify this and ask additional questions. So asset data available on the QR code. So how many of you familiar with facility guide? Okay. Well, commissioning, so the ASHRAE guidelines talk about facility guide. What is facility guide? Facility guide is summary of your systems manual. So basically, facility guide can help the client get very quickly to the information that they need. Not the tens of, or thousands of pages of systems information, but very short description for every system, for every piece of equipment. Now, if you're using a software for your commissioning process, then your software can become the interactive facility guide that the owner can use post-project completion. CMMS, we talked about CMMS, and documentation, asset data for the owner. A quick example, so how many of you are familiar with digital twins? Right, so digital twins are a digital representation of the building that are connected to the data within the building, right? It talks to the meters, talks to the BMS system, and represents the actual operation of the building. So we have a client, Brookfield Properties, so their final deliverable or final product is the digital twin. So digital twin gets populated with all the asset data, with all the data related to systems. So they chose Willow as their digital twin provider. And the great thing about that, this client is because they've established the requirements from the beginning of the project, what the expectations are for the delivery of that, of the building, right? So at the end of the project, the commissioning provider manages their data, documents, all their processes in the software, right? And then at the end of the project, that data checklists, set points for various equipment, changes, schedules, all the data gets collected and then just gets passed to the digital twin, and so that the owner can now start really looking at the building's operation with a reference to the digital twin. So basically, that gap you can solve very easily with any commissioning software that, so in that hall you've seen various types of commissioning software, products available. So what you want to make sure is when you're selecting software to help you bridge that gap, to help you document all those tests, all those results of the tests that you've conducted, all the information related to equipment. What you want to do is you want to start looking at, you know, does the software support your current processes, right? You know, does it integrate with the CMMS system, right? So again, if the client requires you to populate the CMMS system, can the software help you gather all the data that you've entered into the software as you perform the commissioning activities, and then pass it to, you know, to the owner at the end of the project. Now, you also need to figure out when you say does it integrate with the CMMS system, what does that mean? It does, you know, going through an Excel, is that integration sufficient, or do you have to have an API, or maybe there's some another process of data exchange, maybe through a you know, BIM file, like Corby, for example, right? Does it provide a mobile application to capture data, right? So if you're on site, you want to be able that all the data you come across, you can quickly you know, maybe scan a QR code if that's required, scan a barcode, and document all that information right there on the job site. You want to make sure that the product that you use to bridge that gap can actually help enhance that turnover process, right? And basically, like I said, if this is the right tool and the owner, maybe you guys use an internal tool that you already have. Some of the building owners, for example, that we work with, really don't have any tools. You know, it could be just like an e-builder where they just dump all the files, and it's really hard to get to the information. Just think about your building operator goes to the roof, you know, to troubleshoot you know, a problem with an air cooling unit. Like, what do you do? Like, do you bring a folder with you? Do you bring, like, your laptop? I mean, it's really hard, right? So, again, when you're looking at the software product, just think of, you know, can it help the owner at the end to get to the information quicker? Can that tool become that facility guide that you can pass to the owner, and then the owner can utilize for sustainable operation? So, I think that's what we're trying to convey here, is that we do all acknowledge there is a gap. We acknowledge that's pretty big. And I think the technology that's available today can really help you kind of bridge that, bridge the gap. Oops. Yep. Any questions?
You're talking about, would that kind of be the same sort of thing? Like could that facility guide be submitted to LEED for LEED commissioning purposes?
I don't think so, because LEED is very specific in terms of what they want, right? So they're not necessarily very specific on the content, but they're specific on the verbiage. So I believe LEED requires a systems manual, and that's fine. You can generate the systems manual. But if you look at the guideline 1.4, I believe, actually guideline that talks about systems manual, there's everything there, right? There's a lot of stuff there. And again, if you can generate systems manual in our software, right? And it'll produce a number of PDFs that can be, tens of thousands of pages. The facility guide is, if you drive a newer car and you can just go through the controls and get to the each system within your car and quickly get to all the information that you need. That's exactly what facility guide is. It's a concise information that can really help the operations team get to the data that they need. Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of you. We'll get to you.
Hello? Okay. I think another part of this gap comes from, you create project deliverables, final reports, systems manuals, facility guides, turn those into the owner, but we don't have direct communication with the facilities teams a lot of times after turnover. So I'm curious, kind of an out-of-box question here, but have you had any experience with or thought about implementing like a commissioning training program into the specifications where the commissioning representative will sit down with the facility and train them based on some of those hidden things you're talking about, go through the facility guide, something like that? Ever been implemented?
Yeah, well, I think we've
You
all
can start
done
first.
it.
I'll give my opinion.
So I think for me, there's two things. Well, one, we want to make sure, depending on the project, sometimes the operations team hasn't been hired yet. So that is a big challenge, and that's something, it's hard to work with. But we recommend during all of our functional testing that the operation team is involved, that they come there, that they witness it, because I think that's actually a lot more valuable than some of the training. And then during some of the warranty calls, so, a lot of times on projects when we do have it, we have that, within that 11-month period. I like to come out there maybe, for, a couple times to verify, hey, how's the building operating? Are you following everything? Have you had the override system? So those are the type of opportunities that you can still have some face-to-face after the actual project completion.
So I've worked in a couple of environments where our operations team actually ran the commissioning, and the commissioning authority just was like documentation. Did this work? Did this work? So operations is pushing and opening breakers, which gets into a contractual problem, right? Construction hasn't turned over the facility yet. Operations is very hands-on. I've had other facilities where our CxAs are embedded within operations for the life of the project. So it's almost like a retainer base. I have a PM out there kind of running down and looking at issues, right? So you pay that service to maintain that transfer of knowledge in case things break or fail to go, right? I know not every owner has that budget and every luxury, so there has to be some way that we can convey what are we finding, how are we finding it, and how can you be better trained to maintain and operate that facility. When I was a provider, we had some owners that were savvy to that and kept us on through occupancy for 2 years. Right? We had to run seasonal testing over 4 seasons just to continue to beat into the operations team. Here's how it's supposed to work. Here's how it's supposed to work. Keep doing what it's supposed to do. So you're building that market within that owner team that they begin to trust you as an ally.
I can give you an example. So my last project before joining Facility Grid was LaGuardia Airport, Terminal B. So it was a very complex project because it's an existing facility, and the construction was done in phases, and so they were kind of on a rolling way, opening the gates. The challenge that the facilities teams we're envisioning and having, right, is that, it's an airport. like day one, starts, and you have to have, stuff needs to work. You can't just shut down operation, right, in the airport. And so for them, they understood what they're walking into. It was very sophisticated facility. There's a lot of sophisticated features in the building, and so they understood this, and they worked with us all the way from the beginning. When, like I said, when we sit down in the beginning, we said, okay, what data do you need to get? Okay, that was that phrase. What equipment is there and what it does, that actually came from them, from that client who said, that's what I need. I need to know this. And so they were involved with us through every step of the process. We have a controls integration meeting, right? They're in it, okay? We have an integration, file arm with controls. They're there, right? We're doing startups. So we involve witnessing startups. They're there. We're doing integrated system tests, right? All these different scenarios, they're there, right? They understand that as soon as we walk out, it's there. So that's.
So we have a very large engineering university client who basically does all their projects as lead. And for our firm, it is pretty much a dreaded task because we go back onto these sites, meet with the maintenance personnel on other projects after the fact, and these guys have never seen a copy. They don't even know what a systems manual is. And the project managers there have been basically told to keep the maintenance staff pretty much out of all the procedures because all they do is say, well, we want this and we want that because this isn't going to work for us. And all these PMs are just like, okay, this is just budget related. So, on our end, it's kind of a wasted effort because they're getting a deliverable, but these guys are getting their O&Ms, so that's what they're dealing with from the GC, but they are never seeing this, and so on our end, it's been kind of a wasted effort, but trying to still work with these guys, but then we have the university engineers who have their own mindset of how they want things done and everything else we can't ever seem to get on the same page with these guys, and it's kind of like talking to a brick wall. So more of a comment, I guess, than.
So I do have one question. Are they involved in like the OPR process? So are they in there from the beginning, or do they come in after the testing? So,
they're not involved at all in that process. We are, and we try to push for that. And occasionally during construction, we'll see the guys wandering throughout the building, just kind of looking at the building.
But at that point,
at that point, it's already done. So it's totally a disconnect on their end. So, which I feel bad for them, because we'd love to be able to give them some help there, but it's, so.
I often see that gap because there are two organizations, the capital project manager, and then there is the facility operators and facility manager. These two organizations, sometimes the capital project manager won't allow anybody from the operations to get involved. Even after we ask, we just get blocked.
Yeah, Ashkan, that's what my role is, right? And I think every owner needs to have a role like me, right? Quality assurance commissioning manager. You're interfacing between capital, between finance, between engineering, between operations, and you're taking all the lessons that you have learned as a provider and lessons learned just through experience and trying to fill that gap, right? So one thing that we've implemented is our surrogates for maintenance in construction. They're my inspectors that go out there and act as the voice and the eyes for them to take information back. It's like a little mole, right? They're kind of like spying on, here's what we're doing, here's what we're seeing. But it's helping to fill that gap because operations also has the challenge of, it's a construction project and I have my real job I have to do to maintain this facility. That's true. So unless they have a construction-facing ops team, you really almost have to say, we need a budget, remember that CX budget, writing that SOW, that focuses on getting CXAs out there more often to act as an owner's rep, if you will.
Makes sense.
Great presentation. I guess my question is, as buildings become more sophisticated due to energy management, decarbonization, electrification, you know, all the things that are going on sustainability-wise to lower the energy intensity of buildings. I get that we've talked more about training and things like that, but I'm curious, because I feel like on the operations side, people leave, there's turnover, there's people get promoted to a new building, they were the assistant, now they're the chief here, and a lot of that knowledge kind of walks out the door, of which we're talking about how do we keep that knowledge in the building to help the operations team. So I get that I hope you don't give me the, just do it all, but I'm kind of curious, like which one of these concepts, the facility guide, the systems manual, digital twins, like which one of those kind of ideas do you think is most valuable to, I guess, almost bringing new people that come into the building up to speed on how the building would operate?
So it depends, right? So it depends on what type of facility there is, right? It depends what type of people are running the facility, their experience, their knowledge, because what we see a lot of times is, yes, the buildings have become very complex, right? So you have all these requirements, even for like lab buildings. It used to be that when you design a lab building, all you concentrate on safety. You know, can the building systems do what they have to do? Now, in addition to that, they have to be super energy efficient, right? You're building a building like this for a client that has other similar buildings, and the operators understand their systems, but now you bring to life something that they've never seen. Now, the design team, the commissioning team, they learn, they attend conferences a lot of times, right? They learn all this new features, new equipment, new systems. A lot of times, the operations team, maintenance teams, they're not very familiar with these new systems. So then what happens is, as soon as commissioning provider leaves, everything goes to manual. You know, your set points get reset, right? So that becomes a problem. So the most important part for the commissioning provider during those meetings with the owner and putting together owner project requirements, you need to understand who's going to be managing that building, who's going to be operating that building. And based on that, based on understanding that, then you can guide the team in determining what is going to be, like, is it digital twin, is it BIM? You can say, yeah, that's great, we're going to have BIM. Well, if BIM your final product, well, you need to set the requirements from the beginning. What is it going to be used for? Is it going to be used just as a pretty model, and you can just walk through it and just look sexy, right? But there's really no use for it, that's fine. Or if it's really going to be used for, like, BIM for FM, for example, right? So you have to establish the requirements on how do you make it as built, how do you put the data in there. So anyway, it's like I said, it really depends, and it really responsibility of the commissioning provider to help the owner figure this out, right? In the beginning, set the requirements in OPR, transfer them to specs, and so on and so forth.
And one other thing, the big thing is you have all that information, but to keep all that information, so the training and stuff, yeah, it fades as that person leaves. You lose that knowledge, but having like a digital copy, digital record of all that information, I think is very helpful. And also, as us commissioning providers, creating that partnership. So like focus more on that, you're trying to, relay that ongoing commissioning. So yeah, so as their facility change, having that commissioning presence there, the ongoing to help kind of, as new people come in, to show them where that documentation is, show them how to use it, show them what you found, run through some of the FPTs with them. So those are ways that can kind of keep that consistency going throughout the project.
We have a couple minutes left. Any other questions?
You mentioned having your O&M staff. Oh, sorry. You mentioned having O&M staff do the commissioning. We were proposing on a project that we didn't win, but the the way it was written was to have the construction team run the building for the first year through the warranty phase and kind of be guiding the O&M staff or training them on the operation of the system. What's your thoughts on that?
I'm lucky to keep contractors around through substantial completion. No, I mean, that's interesting, right? I mean, I could see that like in a multi-phase project where you're going to have multiple zones coming on different times. Because contractors are accountable for temporary use of equipment through construction. And even if we have started it up and we are using it, they do have culpability in that. I would want to turn it over to the owner as fast as I possibly could if I'm a contractor. And if I'm operations, I want to get my hands on that equipment as soon as I can as well.
Well, don't. My only question with that is you're just basically putting a Band-Aid. So what happens to that year after? You're basically in that same position that you were.
It was a really interesting setup, and I think it was probably to try and make the contractors have a little bit more ownership over turning over something instead of just saying, here's your building and walking away, right? When there's problems with it during the first year of operations, they're the ones who see it, they have to fix it, they learn from it instead of just leaving it to the owner to deal with it. I haven't seen that in any other project. I'm just curious if you've seen it.
Yeah. That's a new one. Like I said, I guess we won't hold you too long, but I appreciate you guys taking the time and thank you for attending the presentation.
Yeah,